hold on 1 second. Just a quick check-in that folks can see the first slide in the slide deck. Sandra, I'm getting a thumbs up. Amazing. Okay, perfect. So thank you again for joining me here today. We have enabled closed captioning, so you should be able to access that in the Zoom bar at the bottom. You can click on that so you can see the closed captioning for today. If at any point my sound quality changes or anything like that, please just send me a message in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand, unmute, just let me know if there's any sort of technical complications. So my name is Erin Clow, and the pronouns I use are she and her. And I am the Associate Director of Education and Learning in the Human Rights and Equity Office. In addition to that role, I have worked as an adjunct faculty member since 2016 in a variety of different classroom spaces on campus. So I've predominantly taught in gender studies, but I've also taught extensively in the School of Rehab. And during that time that I have taught courses, I've taught everything from a first-year large lecture-based course to a much smaller PhD level course. So lots of experience teaching and learning on campus. And at the outset, I also want to recognize that the breadth and depth of experience of folks who are in this virtual space. And so I recognize that each of us are coming in with unique experiences and understandings of this topic of inclusive pedagogy and inclusion in teaching. And so for some of you, it might be your first time teaching. For others, it might be your 18th year teaching. And I'm really hoping that we all feel comfortable enough bringing that knowledge and those skill sets into this space. I've designed this presentation to really be a conversation. So there's lots of opportunities for us to talk to one another as we go through the session. So before I go any further, I just want to pause for a moment, and I want to acknowledge the land that Queen's University and Kingston is situated upon. I'm joining you from Kingston. And so Queen's University is situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. And so to acknowledge this traditional territory is to recognize its longer history, one that predates the establishment of the earliest colonies. It's also to acknowledge this territory's significance for the Indigenous peoples whose practices and spiritualities were tied to the land and continue to develop in relationship to the land and the territory and its other inhabitants today. The Kingston Indigenous community continues to reflect the area's Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee roots, and there's also a significant Métis community and other First People from other nations across Turtle Island who are present here today. And so for me, the conversations that we're going to have today about inclusive pedagogy are really deeply connected to understanding the continued impact and expression of colonialism in the university and in our classrooms. So for me as an educator, inclusive pedagogy is really deeply rooted in decolonization and then indigenization of the curriculum. And personally, I'm really committed to this work and also the continual unlearning that I need to do and learning that's necessary in order to move this conversation forward and this work forward. All right. So the other thing I like to do at the beginning of all my sessions and I hope this comes through during today's session, is I've really tried to model this presentation around inclusive pedagogy practices. So one of the things that I always like to do in my classrooms or in a space like this is start with a community agreement. And so I've put a few things up on the screen that I'm hoping we can all agree to for the next hour. But I would also invite each of you to think if there's other things you would like to add to this community agreement. If there are, please feel free to put them in the chat. And or if you'd like to voice this suggestion to add to the community agreement, please feel free to do so as well. So the first thing I would say is that this is a collective learning space. As I said at the outset, we're all coming from different perspectives and experiences, and I really want to invite that into the conversation today. I'm hoping that we can share the space, creating lots of space for everyone to contribute in the way that they'd like to contribute to the conversation. I would also invite us all to, throughout today's conversation, check in with yourself. See how you're feeling. How are things resonating? Do you need to take a break? Just keep continually sort of checking in as we move through the conversation today. And then I would invite us all, including myself, to think about this as just the start of a conversation and really agreeing to and committing to learning beyond this session. When I was thinking about this topic, I was like, oh my goodness, this could be an entire, course. So we really are just going to sort of open the box today. And so I encourage all of you to continue learning beyond the session. So I'm going to pause and just see if there's anything else that folks would like to add to this community agreement before we move forward in the discussion. I'm not hearing anyone voice anything, and I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but if something does come up for you, please feel free to pop that in the chat, and I'll circle back to that piece so we can record it for the group. All right, moving us forward. So what are we going to do in the next 45 minutes or so? First of all, we're just going to do a little bit of a conversation around the why. Why do we want to think about accountable or inclusive classroom spaces? Why inclusive pedagogy? And I'm going to pull on the Queen's Shift survey to talk about that. We're then going to unpack some ideas around inclusive pedagogy. Then we're going to spend some time looking at a scenario and hopefully applying some of that learning into an actual scenario. And then finally, I'll just sort of provide you with some additional resources as you move forward in your teaching journey this year. So that's what we're going to do. Hopefully we get to it all. We'll see how timing goes. Okay, so let's talk about the why. And I want to also say that, in choosing to be here, I recognize that you all have your own why around inclusive pedagogy and are likely committed to knowing more about this and implementing it into your classroom spaces. So I thought it would be helpful to start with this conversation around this SHIFT survey. So I'm wondering if folks have heard of the SHIFT survey. So maybe folks can pop a yes or a no into the chat if you've heard of this SHIFT survey at Queen's. Okay. Thanks, folks. Okay, a good mix. Great. Okay, so the SHIFT survey was first launched in 2021, and it was a survey of students, undergraduate, graduate, and professional programs at Queen's. And in that first iteration of the survey, 5,400 or so students took part. So a pretty good sampling of students. And it was designed to understand campus climate, particularly for students. And so since that first iteration of the survey, there has since been a second survey. So there was one in 2022, 2023, and we're currently just analyzing those results. So the results that we are looking at today are from 2021. I'm also going to pop some links in the chat to information about the SHIFT survey. So hopefully these work for folks. Oh, I'm sorry, that first one didn't hyperlink. But the second one will take you to a snapshot report of the 2021 survey. So I've pulled some stats from this survey just to sort of contextualize what we're talking about. So thanks, John, for putting that in. Oh, thanks, Sandra. Amazing team. So I've just pulled a few, shots from this survey to sort of contextualize why do we need to think about inclusion in our classroom. So one of the questions in the survey was, I feel safe at school, disagree or agree. And you can see overall 94% of the students that were surveyed agreed that they felt safe at school. But when we really start to see emerge is that when you disaggregate this data, you start to see that there are certain groups of students who don't necessarily feel safe at school. And so I won't go through all of the data on the screen. I know you can see it, but we can see that 27% of the students who identified as non-binary or two-spirit did not agree that they felt safe at school. We can see 19% of Black women, did not agree that they felt safe at school. So again, overall, students, it seems, feel safe. But when we start to look at certain, groups of students broken down by identity, other trends emerge. This question was, I feel like I need to hide some aspects of my identity to fit in. And again, you can see the overall data. 55% disagreed, 45% agreed with that statement. But you start to see, again, when you disaggregate the data, that certain groups of students are feeling like they do need to hide some aspects of their identity to fit in. So again, topping that list, 77% of non-binary or two-spirit students who identified in that way felt like they did have to hide some aspect of their identity to fit in. 65% of racialized students, 63% of students who identified as having a disability. Again, this says something about this need to think about inclusion in our classrooms. This question was, I feel comfortable sharing my own perspective and experiences in class. So again, 69% agreed, but 31% disagreed. To me, even, one student that feels like they can't share their perspective or experience in the classroom is a problem, is something that I want to address as an educator. So the fact that 31% of students felt that they couldn't or they didn't feel comfortable sharing, to me says we have work to do around inclusive pedagogy. And then the final stat that I'll share with you is specifically related to the classroom, like that last one. I feel I have to work harder than other students to be received as a good student. Again, 56% disagree, but 44% felt like they had to work harder to be perceived as a good student. And then this next one, I've been singled out in class because of my identity. So again, 87% said no, that hadn't happened, but 13% said that did happen to them. And again, for me, it doesn't matter, how small the percentage is. Again, even one student that's feeling that way says that there's work to be done. And then the last one, in class, I've heard faculty members or course instructors express stereotypes based on identity. 73% disagreed, but 27% agreed. So this is only some, snapshot data. There's a lot in those reports, that in those links that are in the chat. So I do encourage you to have a look at those, and it will be interesting to see over time, the comparison of the 2021 data to this new data. If some of these things have shifted with, all the work that is happening on campus related to equity and inclusion and belonging. But I do think that this helps set the tone and the context of why we need to do this work, why we need to think about inclusion in the classroom. Okay, so let's switch into conversations on inclusive pedagogy. And so this is where I want to throw it over to you and open the floor to you. So we're going to start with a group brainstorm, and I'm going to pop a link into the chat for Padlet, and I'm going to explain Padlet in a second. Just hold on 1 minute. Okay. So what you're going to either do is use the QR code on your screen. If you have a mobile device, you can simply scan that and go to the Padlet on your phone if you want to do it that way. Or you can click on the link that's in the chat, and that will take you to Padlet. And on that Padlet screen, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to move over to my Padlet. So just bear with me 1 moment here. You're going to see the Padlet open, and on that Padlet, you are going to see the 2 prompts. So inclusive pedagogy feels like, and examples of inclusive pedagogy include. And I'm going to give us a moment to just start populating out that Padlet. So let me just show you my screen here so you can see that. I'm just going to make this bigger for everyone. And I can see some folks are in there. If you're having difficulty getting into the Padlet, let me know and I can help try and problem shoot that. But yeah, let's just do a bit of a group think on this. Inclusive pedagogy feels like, and so when you want to enter a response, you just click this little plus button, and that will open a new dialog box for you. And then you can just write your response in here. If you want to include a picture, you can upload pictures here. And then you just publish, and it publishes under there. So please do let me know if you're feeling uncomfortable with Padlet or you're unable to get into it. But I'm going to stop talking and give folks maybe 2 or 3 minutes to start populating these 2 prompts on the screen. This is amazing. Thank you, everyone, for populating this Padlet. Keep going as I'm sort of debriefing. So thank you for engaging with this. And I do apologize if me sort of scrolling up and down in the Padlet makes anyone feel seasick or not. But I'm just going to move to this first question here. This inclusive pedagogy feels like. I love starting with this idea because it's really interesting to think about how we, each conceptualize inclusive pedagogy in different ways. So on here, I'm seeing things like teaching to various learning styles and epistemologies, absolutely. Feeling valued for what I am unconditionally, absolutely. Again, that idea of creating a space where everyone can show up to that space and feel welcomed and valued. Accountability in actions and words, absolutely. Being aware of who's taking space or building space for others to feel welcome, absolutely. Meeting students where they're at. Absolutely. Creating an inviting environment. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Absolutely. I would agree with all of these. I think, for me, it is about that, that tone that you set in the classroom from day one of all are welcome, and we are going to, create this accountable learning space where ideas can be discussed and learning in its various forms can occur. I'm going to shift over to that next one with examples of inclusive pedagogy, and these are fabulous. And these will be really helpful as we move through the presentation into the scenario. So reading lists with a variety of perspectives, different assignments that students can show their strengths and knowledge, absolutely. So thinking about, does it have to be the same assessment for everyone, or can you provide options that students can choose from? When asking the class a question, tell the person next to them, yeah, so they can benefit from testing the effect. Absolutely, yeah. So, thinking about different ways to have conversations, even in large lecture halls, you can do like an armchair buddy kind of conversation, or turn to the person beside you, have a conversation, and then come back to the larger group. Flexibility in deadlines, absolutely. Assessment formats, yes. Introducing curriculum examples about underrepresented groups, absolutely. So part of this is sometimes specific to your particular discipline. Have you noticed that there are gaps within the discipline that you study or you work? And how can you proactively start to address those gaps through the curriculum that you teach or the readings that you choose to showcase? Absolutely. Multiple teaching styles, acknowledging multi-faith celebrations, absolutely. So thinking about, when assignments are due, do they conflict with significant religious holidays in, a multitude of faiths and traditions? Okay, wonderful. And I apologize for my voice. I have a bit of a cold, so I do apologize about that. I'm going to stop sharing unless there is anything that folks would like to voice in relation to this question of what is inclusive pedagogy. I'll just pause before. Is there anything that folks would like to add to this conversation? Thank you, Monica, for including that. That's amazing. Monica's included the multi-faith calendar in the chat, and I think that's a really helpful resource. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and shift back to the presentation. Again, apologies for my voice. All right. me just shift this back over. Okay. Hopefully we can all just see my screen again. If you can't, just let me know in the chat. So let's build on these ideas. So this is a definition of inclusive pedagogy that I pulled from the Office of Teaching and Learning from Denver University. This isn't by no means to say that this is the be-all and end-all definition, but I really liked parts of this definition that they spoke to me. So it says inclusive pedagogy is student-centered. It's a student-centered approach to teaching that engages the wealth of intersecting social identities and positionalities that all students bring into the classroom. It's not an afterthought. Rather, it should permeate every aspect of the curriculum and course design, classroom management, and assessment of teaching and learning. And so to take that a bit further, this image is from Colorado State University, the Institute for Learning and Teaching. And I really liked the idea of, sort of inclusive pedagogy being in the middle, some parts that can be thought of through the lens of inclusive pedagogy, and then that very outer ring of, the diagram, the visual that's on the screen, is thinking about how we go about doing this. So investigating and planning, engaging and integrating, reflecting and assessing, how did these things work? And then identifying and aligning, and then you sort of just keep going around. So for me, inclusive pedagogy is reciprocal. It understands that the classroom space is a reciprocal learning space. I enter those learning spaces fully expecting that I'm going to learn from my students, that we're going to learn from each other. It's learner-centered. So again, it's, centers learners within the curriculum, within the classroom, and really strives to think, what do these learners need to succeed in this particular course? I also think inclusive pedagogy enables students to be fully present. So I'm a firm believer that there are multiple forms of knowledge and ways of learning and ways to represent learning. And so I think that, inclusive pedagogy really enables students to bring all of their experiences and knowledges into the classroom. And then I think finally, inclusive pedagogy is about being aware and committing to overcoming access barriers. And these access barriers absolutely can be, accessibility related. And so I think sometimes when I hear the word access, my mind immediately goes to accessibility, and absolutely we need to think about that. But there are lots of other access barriers that students might encounter in a classroom. One that comes to mind is financial barriers that students might experience in relation to perhaps the textbook that was chosen for the course. Are there other ways of, either choosing a text box that perhaps has an online offering? Those are often cheaper than, a physical copy of a textbook. Are there other ways of pulling together readings or materials that maybe make it more accessible financially for students? So just broadly thinking about access, what barriers might students encounter in our learning spaces? I am going to pop some links in the chat around inclusive pedagogy. And these are resources, tools. The top two are from our own Center for Teaching and Learning because there is a wealth of information on the CTL site. So I'm going to pop these into the chat. And then I do have a handout I'm going to give out, and these are also included in that. So if these don't show up as hyperlinks, oh, they did, amazing. I do have them on the bottom of the handout as well. So now what I would like to do is turn to, applying our learning. Again, I recognize the wealth of knowledge that is in this virtual space. And so I really want to leave some space for us to co-create ideas around inclusive pedagogy and what it can look like for us as we move into teaching over this next year. So what I have done is I have crafted a scenario, and I've done my best to keep it pretty broad. So hopefully there are parts of it that connect with the various learning streams that you're in, or the various disciplines that you're in. I recognize some of us in this space are graduate students, some of us are faculty members, and so our teaching contexts are different, but hopefully there's something in this scenario for everyone. And sorry, John, I'm seeing your comment in the chat. Okay. So John has raised a comment around, what an indigenized physics curriculum might look like. And I'm wondering if there's anyone in this space that has any ideas around what an indigenized physics curriculum might look like. I'll just pause for a second.
I didn't mean to derail the session. I was just, reflecting on that slide about, how all these pieces fit together. There's at least one piece in this inclusive puzzle that I simply know I haven't found anything about it. I haven't heard discussion of it. I know too little myself.
Yeah, no, thank you. You haven't derailed the session at all. This is exactly the conversation we're hoping to have. Sandra, do you think you could just pause the recording for a second? Because I do think, again, given the wealth of knowledge that's in this room this morning, I want to get to this final activity, which is a scenario. I can't seem to attach a document in the chat, so I'm going to actually post the scenario in the chat, because I do recognize there's a lot of words on the screen. So I'm going to post the scenario in the chat here. So this is the scenario that I'd like us to think about. So this upcoming year, you've been hired to teach a second-year lecture course with about 100 students. In addition to the weekly lectures, this course has weekly small group discussions. You have a team of 2 teaching assistants, or TAs, who will each be leading 2 small discussion groups. Again, for folks in the sciences, feel free to think about those small groups as like a lab type setting. This is the first time the department has offered this particular second-year course, and you are responsible for designing the content, including the syllabus, assessment, etc., all the bits. During the previous academic term, you attended a workshop like this on inclusive pedagogy, and you left the session and you felt inspired and interested at looking at your teaching through this lens. You do, however, feel a bit overwhelmed and unsure of where to start. You decide that if you break your teaching down into parts, this might help you collect your thoughts and move forward. And so you've identified these 5 key areas: the syllabus, the lecture, these small group discussions, the assessments, and then just broadly communication for the course. And so now you need to think about, what does inclusive pedagogy look like in these various areas? So what needs to be considered? What strategies might you apply? And what questions do you still have? So I'm going to put those questions in the chat. And what I'm going to get us to do, and this is going to be quick, but I think it's a valuable exercise, is I'm going to put us into breakout rooms. And so group 1 is going to think about the syllabus, group 2, the lecture, group 3, small groups, group 4, assessment, and group 5, communication. And I've set up another Padlet for this, so I'm going to pop that Padlet link in the chat. And I'm going to ask you in your breakout rooms to focus on, if you're in group 1, syllabus, so on and so forth. And just start populating the Padlet with some ideas around what strategies might look like in relation to inclusive pedagogy and the lectures. What might it look like in relation to assessment? And so we're all going to be working in the same Padlet, and so we'll all be able to see each other's work. And if folks are comfortable, what I would like to do afterwards is create a PDF of the Padlet and send it out to participants, so you have that as a takeaway. So does that make sense for everyone? So you're going to be in breakout rooms. I'm going to give you about 8 minutes in those breakout rooms, which I know is not a lot of time. But I'm going to give you about 8 minutes in the breakout rooms, and you'll each focus on a different aspect of a course through the lens of inclusive pedagogy, and really focus in on what strategies might you apply in relation to inclusive pedagogy. Any questions before I send you in breakout rooms? Okay, I'm going to open the rooms. If you need support, I'll be here, and I'll come to your rooms.